Samuel Lopez, a member of the San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Tongva, to acknowledge the sacred land that we are on right now. Samuel.
Miha, Yohayahia, Newadyane Samuel Lopez. Hello, welcome. My name is Samuel Lopez, and as he has mentioned, I am a descendant of the first people of this land that we gather on today, the San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, Gabrielino Tongva. And we have been here since time immemorial. Our territory is commonly known as LA Basin, 4 Southern Channel Islands, and Orange County. This land has long served as a place of sustenance, culture, and community for the first people who steward this land. We honor the enduring presence and resilience of Gabrielino Tongva people, past, present, and future. We acknowledge the Tongva peoples as the traditional caretakers of the Tongar land that we gather here today. As we open the symposium, we honor and pay our respects to Hanufekton, Achichoron, and Yochinim, ancestors, elders, and relatives, past, present, and emerging, and move forward in a good way on this Gabrielino Tongva unceded land. Now, I just want to emphasize again that the land that we gather on today would not be here without the resilience of Mother Earth and the ancestors that stewarded this land here. The Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians are not just residents, but caretakers of this land. The traditions, wisdom, and teachings of our ancestors emphasized living in harmony with the universe as well as the environment itself. We understand that the natural world is not something separate from us, but an extension of ourselves. The trees, rivers, mountains, and animals are our relatives. And as First Peoples, our connection to this land is not one of ownership, but it is rooted in stewardship, respect, and reciprocity amongst all living beings. Climate change, however, threatens this deep emotional and spiritual connection. As we look around at the shifting landscapes here in Los Angeles, the wildfires, the rising temperatures, and the diminishing biodiversity, it becomes clear that Mother Earth is not happy. Mother Earth is sick and she has a fever. All these responses are a clear reaction to how we as humans have been acting as though we are the dominant species and can take whatever we want without repercussions. But Mother Earth is so much older than us. We need to work with her rather than acting as though we know more than she does. Our ancestors have long warned on such imbalances, and the disruption we face today is rooted in centuries of disrespect for the earth. As Indigenous peoples, we understand that the land is not a resource to be exploited, but a living being with whom we share a sacred bond. For the Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, the loss of biodiversity is not merely a loss of plants and animals. It is a loss of knowledge, of ceremony, and of culture. We lose our connection to the past and are faced with an uncertain future. When the land suffers, we suffer. Our communities, already disproportionately affected by environmental degradation, face the hardest impacts, whether it's the loss of access to clean water or the devastating effects of air pollution. But we do not stand here without hope. Our ancestors' teachings offer guidance, and Indigenous wisdom holds the key to healing. Despite 3 waves of genocide, our people and my culture is still present. We are still here. We have long understood that sustainability comes from cultivating relationships with all life. It is this understanding that we must reclaim and restore. We must return to a worldview that prioritizes respect and reciprocity. We must advocate for the protection of sacred lands, the restoration of ecosystems, and the implementation of sustainable practices. These are not new ideas. They are old ways of being that have survived the resilience of the first peoples all around the world. We must push for policies that recognize the rights of nature, promote clean energy, and respect the sacredness of the earth. Now more than ever, we must collaborate and listen to one another, rather than isolating each other's voices and perspectives, especially our native voices. The earth is older than us by so many years, and it is our job as a keystone species to treat her with respect and honor and love that she deserves. In Los Angeles, we have a unique opportunity to rebuild in a sustainable way. From restoring our native plants and wildlife to supporting regenerative agriculture and traditional fire management practices, we can build a future that reflects the values of reciprocity and respect. We can return to the teachings that say, take only what you need, give back, and live with gratitude. So as we face the reality of climate change, let us not forget the wisdom of the land's first stewards. Let us honor the sacred bond and people on the earth, because at the end of the day, everyone is on the same team. Let us come together not just to protect the environment, but to restore the harmony that has been lost, because when the land heals, we heal. So thank you, and I want to welcome you to my ancestral homeland, Awishkonecha Ekwashen.
Please welcome to the stage Christopher Boone, Dean of Saul Price School of Public Policy at the University of Southern California.
Thank you all and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here with you to celebrate the extraordinary work that's being done by the Sierra Club and the Jane Goodall Institute. My name is Chris Boone. I'm the new dean of the Saul Price School of Public Policy, and I'm an urbanist by training, and so we're living in a region of more than 18 million people here in Southern California. And when people look around and they see the wildfires, they see the pollution, the air quality, the degradation of the environment, it's quite natural to ask, is this really the way forward for our planet and our people? And I want to put a positive spin on the notion and idea that urbanization, if done well, can actually lead not only to more sustainable lives and livelihoods in cities, but really to drive sustainability globally. So when we talk about urbanization, it's often coupled with the term Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene is the idea that human activity has had such a profound impact on the earth that we will leave forever a marked indication of our presence here. So after our species is gone, we've done so much harm that future species, whoever they might be, will be able to see the mark that we've left behind. And urbanization is in large part driving that. Right now, more than half the world's population lives in cities. And by 2050, it used to sound far away, but it's actually very soon, 2 of every 3 people on the planet will be urban dwellers. Urbanization and associated activities such as industrialization, mining, land use change, consumption of goods and services is the primary driver of this Anthropocene that I just spoke to you about. So how can we use this powerful driver of urbanization? Because we're not going to stop it. It's not going to turn back. People have tried in the past. Pol Pot tried it in Cambodia. It led to disastrous consequences. So it's part of who we are as a species. But how can we take this incredibly powerful force and find ways to improve human well-being for present and future generations while safeguarding the ecosystems on which all life depends? So there's a challenge, obviously. If you look around, we understand that cities are huge consumers of energy and materials and products. We also produce a lot of emissions. So 75 to 80% of all global emissions comes from cities. The pollutants that I just spoke about. The cities also generate wealth, which can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing depending on how it's used. So 80% of the world's GDP, for instance, comes from urban areas. Now, having said that, the amount of land that cities occupy is relatively small, less than 2%. But the actions that we take, the activities that we undertake in city have profound upstream and downstream impacts. Upstream meaning all the inputs that are necessary for urban life, and downstream meaning all the outputs, again, good and bad, that come from cities. So why do people choose to live in cities? Because clearly this is a trend, as I mentioned, that is not slowing down and will continue to be the norm for the world's population as this century progresses. But also, how can cities be part of the solution? Well, cities we know offer improved access to things that matter to people. So opportunities for education, for healthcare, jobs, social interaction. Interestingly, when people move into non-agricultural occupations in cities, family sizes tend to decline. So one concern I know for many conservationists is the booming population on the planet, which is now at 8 billion. It'll probably peak at about 10 billion in about 2080, and thereafter, if the demographers are right, and there's every reason to believe that they are, human populations will actually decline over the next 10 generations very, very quickly. And so urbanization in that sense is actually driving the slowing down of human population growth. The other thing to remember is that cities are centers of innovation. So my question, and one that I think is critical to answering the future of how we develop a more sustainable society and sustainable globe, is how do we make that innovation responsible? Not just innovation for innovation's sake, but how do we make it responsible? And how do we build in sustainability principles into our decision-making and actions? I'm going to touch briefly on 3 strategies. First, I mentioned jobs. So jobs can take many forms, and one of the really positive trends that we've seen has been the very rapid growth in green jobs and sustainability jobs. So data that we have, for instance, from LinkedIn shows that green and sustainability jobs are increasing globally by about 12 to 15% per year. That's good news. Bad news, the number of people who are qualified to fill those jobs is growing only by 8% per year. So every year there's a widening gap between people with the skills and the number of jobs that are available. And the reason this is important is I don't think we're going to get to where we want to unless we link livelihoods to these sustainability principles that we all care about. So it can't be something that we just think about 10 minutes a day or while you're sitting here in the audience. But if you're thinking about and acting on those principles 40 hours a week, that's the kind of critical mass, that's the kind of commitment that I think we need in order to transform our current system into a system that's more sustainable. By the way, 100 million new jobs are projected by the end of this decade, green jobs. So that's 4 billion person hours a week or 200 billion person hours a year that could be dedicated and devoted to thinking about how to practice those green principles and earn a paycheck at the same time. The second strategy is to really think about how we value nature and nature-based services. So we often talk about nature-based services in terms of their instrumental or use value, but also their intrinsic and their inherent value. And both of them currently are being undervalued by society. Not all societies, as we just heard, but for the majority. If we're just looking at the one side of the instrumental value, the true cost accounting is a method that allows us to attach a monetary value to hit our pocketbooks for the economic benefits that are derived from nature, that are typically taken for granted and taken as free. And some estimates put the value, the instrumental value of nature at more than $125 trillion per year, which is larger than the global GNP. But at the moment, that's not being factored into the decisions that we make. But if it was, if people paid the true costs, that could actually drive a circular economy which treats waste as a resource rather than a burden. And it could, if done well, completely transform our behavior if the right policies are in place. Now, on policy, that's always going to be a really critical component of how we get things done. One of the things that we need to think about is how do we create those kinds of circular economies built in true cost accounting, but at the same time, make sure that there are no free riders. So for instance, we can't have some countries paying a social cost of carbon while others do not. That would be an unfair subsidy, especially, by the way, for countries that have large historical contributions to global GHGs. The United States, even though it's no longer the largest emitter of GHGs in the world, that is now China, historically the US has put more of that carbon into the atmosphere than any other country on the planet. So we need to pay our share. The next is, and the last, is taking the long view in fairness to future generations. And most people want their children and grandchildren or their nieces and nephews to have healthy, happy, and fulfilling lives. I certainly feel that way for my own. So we need to lean into that basic human desire to give future generations a fair chance to be well and to do well on a healthy and robust planet. In my experience, the idea of what we call inter or between generation fairness resonates particularly well with young people and with grandparents. I hear that over and over again. Those are the groups of people that are most passionate about this subject. But unfortunately, those tend to be individuals who are not in positions of decision-making authority. They're not at the right stage of their life to be able to make those critical decisions that we need. So that's why we need organizations like Roots and Shoots of the Jane Goodall Institute. Yes. And the Sierra Club to amplify their message. So imagine, if you will, a future where cities, which is the habitat for the majority of people on this planet, are planned, designed, operated, and governed in a world where green jobs are the norm, nature-based services are truly valued and actively promoted, and the needs and desires of future generations count. Let's work together to turn that imagination into a reality. Thank you very much for listening.
Please welcome to the stage Dr. Alex Hall, Director of UCLA's Institute of the Environment and Sustainability.
so great to be with you here today among friends and like-minded people. I've had such great conversations, and I'm so glad to be here celebrating the Sierra Club and also the incredible work of Jane Goodall. I want to take us back a little bit here and talk about the late 90s and early 2000s, a time when I think, looking back on it, we environmentalists made a mistake. When we started to raise alarms about the impacts of what we were calling global warming, we focused on things that were abstract and distant. Rising global temperatures, sea ice loss, glacial melt, yes, these are all terrifying, and they are very, very real indicators of a new era. But we failed to make the case to people why this mattered to their lives in concrete ways. Climate change has now entered a new phase. We're seeing impacts of this complex phenomenon accelerate, increase in destructive power, and hit closer to home. Climate change shapes people's lives and livelihoods in every day, affecting access to water, shaping insurance markets, even constricting our supply chains and shipping lanes. Understanding megafires, droughts, floods, this is all important, and predicting climate change still represents a tremendous scientific challenge. But its impacts touch social, political, and economic realities as well. If we hope to create meaningful solutions to the underlying causes of climate change and its impacts, we can't engage these challenges in silos. This has been the underlying ethos behind UCLA's approach to addressing climate and sustainability challenges. As one of the country's leading public research institutions, UCLA has an obligation to leverage its tremendous resources across disciplines, across institutions, and across the chasm between the academy and the broader community. This was my motivation in taking over as director of the Sustainable LA Grand Challenge in UCLA in 2023. The Sustainable LA Grand Challenge is a campus-wide incubator for research initiatives in sustainability. I'm sure you all agree that this is a great concept, but you might also wonder how we put this incubator into action. The approach is built on 3 pillars. First of all, we engage from the very beginning the people and the communities who are impacted. We align our research agendas with the needs of people living on the front lines of climate change and the needs of decision makers representing those communities. We produce research and knowledge that can translate into tools and policies to address the challenges people face. We've devoted time and resources over years, building relationships across disciplines and institutions, even USC, from my colleague who just spoke, with communities, civic leaders, and philanthropists. These partnerships take years to cultivate, but allow us to move quickly to be responsive and get time-sensitive research started. We apply the agility and flexibility of a startup approach to rigorous academic research. I want to show you what this all means in practice by looking at an all too relevant example of climate change right here in Los Angeles. Southern California has a great need for actionable research that addresses a growing wildfire problem. So I founded the Climate and Wildfire Research Initiative in late 2023 as a priority of the Sustainable LA Grand Challenge. Southern California is home to 60% of the state's population. So we have densely populated areas adjacent to chaparral and coastal sage scrub. These incredible ecosystems are precious global biodiversity hotspots. And a changing climate is causing fires to become larger and more severe. This threatens people and property, but also the health of ecosystems that are already degraded by human activity. In the face of this increasing threat, what can the academic community do to support solutions that protect people and ecosystems? Well, we've mobilized working groups. One of them is in public health and wildfire. It's focused on the effects of smoke on human health primarily. The second group is focused on our wildland stewardship and the effect of climate change on fire behavior. So we call this our fuels and fire group. And then our third group is focused on our urban water supply and fire, because of course we know now that we need our water supply, not only to provide drinking water for everyday purposes, but also to be there as a fire protection system. So these are the working groups that we had mobilized over the past few years. And then on January 7th, you all know what happened. We had this firestorm in Los Angeles. No one was really prepared for an event at this scale, but we had spent time laying the groundwork and building the relationships. And thanks to support from our philanthropic partners, we were able to move quickly and respond to the crisis. Through the Climate and Wildfire Research Initiative, we've been able to provide seed funding for 6 new research efforts in response to these fires. And this is just a sampling of some of the efforts that we've organized. I'm happy to talk about any of them later with anyone who might be interested. But for now, I want to focus on one effort that demonstrates what the researcher community can bring to the table at this challenging moment. To understand how to rebuild safely and in harmony with our region's ecology, it's critical we understand in great detail how the LA wildfires actually spread through wildland and, sadly, also urban areas. We're developing new simulations to recreate the observed behavior of the Palisades and Eaton fires. The simulations combine the influence of the region's famous Santa Ana winds, vegetation, and flammability characteristics of all the structures that were in the way of the fires. This is a collaborative effort across disciplines and institutions, and we've already managed to get it started very quickly with some seed funding. So here are some preliminary results. This animation shows the initial spread of the Palisades fire. Strong Santa Ana winds are causing the fire to spread rapidly from its ignition point in Topanga State Park through wildlands and urban areas. We're performing a similar simulation for the Eaton fire. You might ask, why would we want to just recreate these fires in a computer simulation? The reason is that in a virtual world, we can change things, we can play God, and we can see what happens. For example, a big question related to future resilience is the efficiency of so-called vegetation management and chaparral ecosystems. So much of our vegetation management policy is built on research in forested areas. For example, strategies like controlled burns and clearing vegetation can be very effective in Western forests. And this is because in forests, we've had a century of fire suppression that has led to a huge increase in fuels in a fire-adapted ecosystem. However, we have reason to believe that chaparral is different. Forest-centric strategies don't work in the same way here. In fact, removing native plants or burning too frequently gives room for more flammable, invasive annual grasses. And when those Santa Ana winds blow, the embers travel so far and so quickly that fuel breaks are much less effective than in forests. And yet, there is tremendous pressure to apply the lessons of the forest to the chaparral and simply clear vegetation in wildlands to protect human lives and property. So going back to the simulation, we can impose changes in vegetation, such as removal of chaparral or the introduction of fuel breaks. And again, we can see how the fire would have behaved had these strategies been employed. And if we can demonstrate that clearing native landscapes doesn't make the fire any less destructive, and I predict that we will, then the preservation of the chaparral is a win for ecosystems and for people. As we're reminded almost daily in the headlines, wildfires are only one of many sustainability challenges, and they all need this level of investment, attention, and engagement. Resilience in the face of these pressing challenges involves not only protecting people, but working with local ecosystems and their dynamics. Most importantly, it involves networking the research community in the right way to build interdisciplinary teams with the right composition of expertise. UCLA's Climate and Wildfire Research Initiative is just one example of how universities can play a transformative role and shape a future that allows the thriving of people and ecosystems alike. Universities are now under attack for being elitist and out of touch with the concerns of ordinary people. The attacks may be dark and unfair, but there's a grain of truth to them. A university should serve its community, and the needs of the community are great. The trends in climate, ecology, and politics all line up. We in the academic community must seize the opportunity. We must leverage our expertise and understanding, coordinate among ourselves, and give the world the answers it needs. Thank you very much.
Now joining us from the Jane Goodall Institute, Dr. Lilian Pintea.
Good afternoon. My name is Lilian Pintea, and this year is going to be 25 years that I have the honor to join Jane and the Jane Goodall Institute team in Tanzania and across Africa in working with local communities, governments, and other partners in applying some of these amazing innovative technologies. But when Jane arrived in Gombe in the 1960s, her only tools were a pair of old binoculars, a notebook, and maybe a typewriter. And from the beginning, she started working very closely with local people. Her mother set up a little clinic with distributing some simple medicine and really developed good relationships with the local fishermen from nearby villages. But today, Gombe is the longest ongoing research site for chimpanzees and baboons in the world. And the Tanzanian scientists and field assistants, many of them from nearby communities, are combining the traditional knowledge with the latest science tools to continue this incredible long-term research while connecting science with the conservation in their own communities. So this year, Gombe turns 65. And we are truly celebrating Gombe as this living lab, as this unique place in the world where we can continuously discover, innovate, and hope by bringing the latest technologies to answer questions which we cannot ask anywhere else in the world. For example, we can use now AI to not only detect chimpanzees or chimpanzee individuals. The work which we're doing with Microsoft and Oxford University enables us even to potentially detect behaviors out of videos. More than that, we're inventing new ways of collecting field data. For example, listen. These are chimpanzees. And within just 1 minute, you can hear several species in Gombe. This opens new doors to find out about the secrets of biodiversity that we never had a chance to find out. In fact, in the last 2 years, thanks to bioacoustics, we are able to discover new species in Gombe, including one bush baby, which has been new not only for Gombe, but also for Tanzania. So the pace of this new innovative technologies, the vast amount of rapidly increasing global data, it's truly amazing. We can map now individual trees in Gombe from drones, like this image collected last month. And we can use mapping technologies from our colleagues at Esri to map not only the trees, but also the heights of these trees. But we can even do more than that. We can actually map these trees and the heights of the trees from satellites, from space, thanks to partners like Maxar. And because it's from space, we can not only just map it in Gombe, we can do this across the world consistently. So how we can unlock this incredible power of science and technologies to convert it into action, into better decisions, to address some of the truly incredible challenges that we face? Well, in early 90s, Jane had a chance to fly over Gombe. And she realized that Gombe is this isolated forest patch surrounded by deforestation, driven by increasing human population, conversion to farms and agriculture, because of the charcoal consumption and also increase in fires. But she also realized that there is no way we can save chimpanzees or forests or anything else if we do not find a way for the local people to coexist in their landscapes without destroying the environment. And this is how the idea of Takare began. So what is Takare? So Takare is our community-led conservation approach. It's not about just engaging local communities, it's about making sure that they own and drive development and conservation decisions on their land to benefit the lives of people, animals, and shared environment. And they're doing that community by community, village by village. It includes stages like proper engagement. It includes active listening to people's needs, concerns, but also their traditional knowledge and way how they see the landscapes and natural resources. It also includes steps back in case the local communities are not ready or if JGI support is not needed. The entire Takare process is grounded in maps. It uses geography and geographic approach and geospatial tools to integrate local and scientific knowledge to guide a common understanding of the problem and finding new solutions and facilitate implementation of the solutions by communities themselves by facilitating access to tools maybe like mobile collection, as you could see here, a village forest monitor using this. Now, in 2005, when communities have been experiencing huge land degradation, erosion, you can see landslides, they decided to use Takare to set up village forest reserves interconnected to each other as part of the larger land use plans, and then use technologies like mobile tools and smartphones and Survey 123 mobile apps to patrol those reserves. And this paid off. By 2014, you can see that the woodlands are coming back, that the rivers are looking better. More than that, it's not the increase in forest patrolling and community monitoring not only increased the forest regeneration and conservation, but also decrease in fire frequency. Now, fires are a natural part of these landscapes. However, with increasing human density, with increase in climate change, we truly need to rethink how we integrate our local knowledge of living with fires, with related data and tools like this daily satellite images, which we can get from Planet now, and see, for example, that last month in September, a fire which started outside Gombe sneaked into the park and actually resulted in burning 45% of the park. But the same images can be used now to see the resilience of nature, to see that actually most of the vegetation around October, like this image, starts coming back. And I was just in Gombe in March, and it was very difficult to see that actually the fire was present here. It's truly amazing. Now, all this data collected in Gombe long-term, combined with bioacoustic devices, which you can see on the map, that we had 5 microphones actually recording how the wildlife is reacting to the fires. All this data we're bringing together to better understand fire and our resilience to living with fires. But these tools are also expanded in partnerships with local communities and Takare to support community research centers like this one, where the communities themselves can have access to these tools, to smartphones, camera traps, bioacoustic devices, and collect this data themselves to inform and connect it with the youth organizations in their communities and elder knowledge, and bring all of this together to inform local decisions, like this newly formed Natural Resources Village Committee. All these Takare tools are available not for free, not only in Africa, but can be applied anywhere in the world, including here. But what makes these tools amazing is Takare. Few years ago, I had a chance to be in a village and sit down with the communities to discuss what happens on the village forest reserve. And one woman pointed to an area which used to be her farm, but she had to move her farm because now it's a forest reserve. So she has to work extra hour to get there. So I asked if it was worth it. This is a lot of extra time to spend every day. And she pointed to me on this satellite image. And most likely she never seen the images before or maps before. But she pointed to this image and said, look at this. In 2005, our landscapes were bare. We had landslides, we had erosions. Now, look at now. All the trees are coming back. The streams look better. Now, if you look near that stream, there is a building. That is a school. one day a big flash flood came and almost destroyed the school. I had 2 children in the school. I better walk extra hour, but I know that our children are safe. And I realized sitting around these maps with the communities that the true power of these incredible technologies is that they have been embedded, thanks to Takari, into a locally owned decision-making process where people trust it and actually use this data to guide their decisions and change their behaviors, even at the personal cost. So if you're inspired by the stories, please, and want to apply Takari in your own communities, please check our Takari story map, read our book, which we published with our partner at Esri, and I'm very grateful to our technology partners over the years supporting this incredible application, from NASA to Esri, Maxar Planet, and other partners. Thank you again.
Please welcome back to the stage Sierra Club Executive Director Ben Jealous.
What a special, special afternoon. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you for being here. You know, we're here today to reflect as human beings on this planet together, as activists in a movement together, about how we fulfill, for those of us who are raised in the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, understand to be God's first commandment to humanity, to protect the garden. Bible, Genesis says, and God put man in the garden, it uses the verb shamar, to serve, to protect, to guard the garden. And yet, we live with the understanding that the world is dying. We talked about a climate crisis that actually sits inside of a larger extinction crisis. The climate crisis threatens us, but the extinction crisis tells us that even more species are dying now, every month, every year, than died when the dinosaurs went extinct. And what's driving that? Habitat loss, pesticides. We're here today, in other words, to ask each of us to recommit ourselves to be like Jane, to be like Dr. Jane Goodall. Dr. Goodall shares something in common with John Muir, who founded the Sierra Club in 1892. They both understand that the purpose of us, that it's not the purpose of nature to serve us, it's the purpose of us to serve nature. When the Sierra Club was founded, there were a lot of hiking clubs. America was going through a smog crisis, and in cities across America, people were forming clubs to get with their neighbors out on the weekends or over a summer break, to get outdoors to clear their lungs. John Muir thought that insufficient. He thought the reason to get people outdoors was to transform their souls. That's why he took Teddy Roosevelt to a place where John Muir used to help operate a sawmill. A valley named for the local tribe translates to man killers. And it broke his heart to cut down trees and mill them in the Yosemite Valley every day. And so when Teddy Roosevelt asked him to take him camping, he knew exactly where to take him. And from that came our first national park, Yosemite National Park, and our entire park system, which is under threat right now. And so you ask yourself, how do you get there? How do you get to be a little bit more like Jane, to be committed to turning the tide against this extinction crisis, and with it, this climate crisis? And I would offer it starts with deciding to get back to your happy place, so that big, huge place that maybe you paddled into, or you swam into, or you walked into, or you hiked into, or maybe it was driving through General Sherman and the Sequoias. That place where you first felt small and nature felt grand and everything connected and you understood why that was the first. Even if you're not a Jew or a Christian or a Muslim, you would at least understand why that was the first commandment given to humanity. Defend the garden, serve the garden, protect the garden. For me, that place was a beach that was a bit notorious in my town. See, I grew up in Pacific Grove, California. It turns out our little town of 15,000 people is per capita the #1 place for human beings to be eaten by great white sharks on the planet. And I was a young big wave bodyboarder, and my sister's good friend had been a kneeboarder, and we cast an unfortunate shadow in a place where the sharks prey on humans, because we wear fins on our feet, and our boards are short, and our shadow from the sun, well, sharks are nearsighted. And it's only after they bit through you and spit you out that they realize, oh man, that is not a seal. And yet I was so in love with riding those waves that I ventured out. And I remember one day the waves were big and then they just stopped and I just floated there. And for the first time, I was really in tune and okay with being prey, with being in the ecosystem, not controlling the ecosystem. And it just felt like all of existence opened up to me. And I eventually got back to shore and I walked home through a forest I'd grown up playing baseball in, George Washington Park in Pacific Grove, California. And it was fall. And it's when the monarch migration ends in our town. And so I'm there still damp from the ocean, carrying my board, staring up at this forest that I've known for as long as I could remember, and marveling at the way that when monarchs land, these little butterflies that are lighter, there's like a portion of a feather in weight. But yet if they land as they do, they did when I was a child in that forest, one after the other, the bough would bend as 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 landed on branches, that branch and branches all around it in that forest. The way a movement, in the words of Dr. King, bends the arc of the moral universe towards justice. So a couple months ago, the monarchs were moved on the endangered species list. Population has plummeted in our lifetimes. Since 1997, most of the lifetimes people here, it's plummeted. But back then it was growing, our movement was growing. That was approximately 1988. In 1989, the environmental movement in America, 76% of Americans said they were environmentalists. But between that moment and this, our movement has shrunk. The most recent reports are that we're about 38% of America. That's the difference between having a super majority that can pass laws and protect them, 76%, and just having a plurality, not even a majority. So we're helpless when 50 years of environmental regulation are wiped out, the stroke of a pen. And now I'm raising my son to surf on those beaches. We go home to his grandparents wherever we can so he can get out on the big waves and he can experience what it's like to be at the whim of the ocean. And it's transforming his soul in beautiful ways. And I say to my dad, how many monarchs came home last year? That grove in Pacific Grove. Now, the high point was in the late 90s. It was 45,000. Our movement was growing. The populations were growing. We were protecting land. Now, I've told you, our movement has shrunk, and we're not as strong as we used to be. Dad, how many monarchs came back last year? He said 18. I said 18 what? 1,800, 18,000? No, Ben, 18, not 20. We are living through an extinction crisis. When we say climate crisis, we're talking about human extinction. But in every religious tradition, and just common sense, if we're of no faith at all, tells us, we're not in control. We don't get to survive unless we can protect at least most of everything else. The pollinators go to zero. We will soon follow. And yet, the nation's largest, most powerful, every corner of every state. Man, Sierra Club's not just like in Jackson, Mississippi. We're in southern Mississippi. We're in northern Mississippi. We are in every part. And it all started with one guy who appears to have been a little on the spectrum, saying, oh, you want to go hiking? Let me just take you to some place that will transform your soul. No, we know how to rebuild this movement. We know how to unblock friends who have gone down a disinformation rabbit hole and say, let me take you out to coffee, brother. We know how to say, that little corner of my yard where I was going to put a new table, let me put a pollinator garden there. We know how to get friends out on the trail here in Los Angeles, the Sierra Club, 1,300 outings a year. And so if you're here today, it means that you have hope enough to show up and say, how do we do better? And I'm here today as the executive director of the Sierra Club to say, join us, and if you're already part of us, lean in even harder, build more pollinator gardens, lead more people into the outdoors, speak up more loudly, and yet find a way to be even more gracious and inviting to all those environmentalists we've lost. The good news, if you do deeper polling, is that the concern is still there. And we know how to lead and to pull people in and to rebuild. We rebuild this movement, we rebuild the forest. We rebuild this movement, we rebuild the wetlands. We rebuild this movement. We serve the garden, we defend the garden, we regrow the garden, and the extinction crisis starts to turn back. And the climate crisis that we can only turn back, is not just going to take technology. We also have to protect way more land. We have to essentially double the size of our national parks, double the size of our national monuments. And if we double the size of our state parks, which, for the next 4 years might be a little bit easier, and our county parks and our city parks, we will have more than done our job. And the good news is that it's the people in this room, it's the people in this club, it's the people in this organization who are part of that great current of humanity that convinced America to create its first national park. It's a national park system, and almost 500, over 480 national parks and monuments since John Muir led Teddy Roosevelt into the valley known as the Man Killers. We've done it once, we can do it again. In a moment, I am going to bring to the stage two phenomenal women. The first, Dr. Jane Goodall. There's no one more symbolic of that intersection of hope and action than her. She has been a global icon of conservation for more than 60 years, inspiring generations to care more deeply, act more boldly, live more gently on this earth. And with Jane, I will bring to the stage Tanara Lee La Rotney wrote to Sierra Club, said, I'm a member. I have read Dr. Goodall's books. I need to be here. Please, Tanara, tell us why we should all be like Dr. Jane Goodall.
We should all be like Dr. Jane Goodall because she wants to help our future generations and our future relatives have a future as well and save the planet also for them.
And what's your favorite book that she's written?
I think I really like In Shadow of Man.
Tell us why.
I like it because she expresses how chimpanzees have feelings and how they how they are very alike to us.
And when you saw Dr. Jane Goodall for the first time today, what did you tell her?
I told her all of the questions I wanted to ask. I wrote them down.
Well, you know, the beautiful thing about Dr. Goodall, who's inspired Tanara and so many people for so long, is that when you commit yourself to saving one species, be it the chimpanzees or the monarchs, you can't help but save so many others. Because those forests, those trees, those wetlands, those habitats, those jungles, they're home to thousands and thousands of other living, beautiful things. What do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be a paleontologist.
And so the next people who will join us on stage will be Dr. Jane Goodall and Giselle Fernandez. Thank you, Tanara. Thank you so much. Here we go. So will you join me in saying, welcome,
Dr.
You do it.
Welcome, Dr. Jane Goodall.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can't tell you what an honor it is to be here to amplify the amazing work of the Sierra Club, and what an honor and a privilege it is for all of us to be here with you, Dr. Jane Goodall. And we welcome you to Los Angeles as you are about to celebrate 91 years young in 2 days on April 3rd. Happy birthday. And when we watch and see video of you in your 20s in Tanzania, just starting out on this birthday, when you look back, 65 years in the Gombe Park, what stands out most to you, top of mind, that should be a priority for all of us as you look back to this moment now?
Well, I think, you know, that one thing, I've lived so many years on this planet and I've seen such change. And some of it is for the good. There are far more people today who understand that animals like us have personalities, minds, and emotions, that we're not, as once was believed by Western science, the only beings with those attributes. And there are more animal welfare groups. Science has really changed to try to understand the way that the universe, the planet works. But there's been some changes, unfortunately, in the other direction, which we've been hearing about with the other speakers before us now. And there, right now, with the current administration, it seems that many safeguards that were put to protect the environment are being overturned.
Your Vote for Change, your Vote for Nature campaign, how can we leverage that here at this moment when the administration is rolling back so many environmental protections, slashing jobs at the EPA? There are science deniers now at the forefront. There are industries that do not embrace these reforms for monetary and budgetary reasons. How do we leverage what you've done to make change here, right now?
I think, you know, people need to understand that every day each one of us lives, we make some impact on the planet and we get to choose. And I think we need to use our voices, not in aggression and not in anger, but in trying to speak the truth about what is happening. and to try and persuade people to think not about what's happening only just now, but the future. How will this world be when a child is born now, when this little girl, when she's the same age as me, what will the world be like? And what the world will be like depends on us now, depends on us having a voice and speaking out what concerns us, not being afraid.
You have always said that one individual alone, especially then when working in community-centered conservation, can make a difference. But to so many who feel overwhelmed with these setbacks and headwinds, what do you say to motivate them that they can make change?
Well, first of all, we have this saying, think globally, act locally, right? It's the wrong way around. When you start thinking globally, you are a little bit overwhelmed. It is overwhelming, and we can't save the world. But I say to them, think about what you care about. Think about what you can do in your community, your little area where you can make a difference. What do you care about? The trash that's lying around in the streets? Do you care about homeless people? Do you care about the plight of stray dogs? Whatever it is, think about what you can actually do. Perhaps persuade some friends of yours to help you, and you will see that you actually are making a difference. That'll make you feel good. So you want to do more, and that will inspire more people. And then, there's one way in which modern technology is really helpful. So we can get news all around the world. We can know what's happening. I wish we didn't in Gaza and places like that. But at the same time, we now know that all around the world, there are people just like us who want to make a difference. And that inspires you even more. And then you dare to speak globally. Think globally, I mean.
Your brand of advocacy was really transformational. It was obviously science-based, but you became the story and the heroine. There were very few women in the early 60s in the field and expected to contribute to any meaningful science. And I want to take us back because your journey is part of what has inspired and infused so many to want to follow in your footsteps and awaken to the wonders of the natural world. You were born in England, you said, to a poor family, your parents divorced, and then you were raised by a bevy of women, your mother, your grandmother, your great aunts. How did they influence you and shape you and your dreams to do what you do today?
Well, the thing is, I was actually born loving animals. Even when I was 1.5, my mother told me. I don't remember, but apparently I took a whole lot of earthworms to bed. And so many mothers would be angry. And she said, Jane, I just think you were looking at them so intently. I think you must have been wondering, how do they walk without legs? So,
well, is it true that you also would, at 4 years old, would hide in the hen house and wait and watch and observe how the hens laid eggs?
Yes, for about 4 hours until a hen came in, because I'd been given the job of collecting hens' eggs, and I kept asking everybody, but where's the hole? Where does the egg come out? And nobody told me. So I distinctly remember this hen going into this little hen house where they slept at night and waiting, and 4 hours. And that was the value of my mother. And I really attribute a great deal of what I've been able to do to her wisdom. So she'd been about to call the police, but when she saw me, she sat down to hear this story about a hen laying an egg. So that was the making of a little scientist, asking questions, curiosity, not getting the right answer, deciding to find out for yourself, making a mistake because I crawled after the first hen who flew out with squawks of fear, not giving up and learning patience. And a different kind of mother might have crushed that early curiosity, and I might not be sitting here today.
And you have also said that there was no one really in your early life that said, especially from your family or your mom, that said, no, you're a girl and girls don't do this. You were given the freedom to explore. And what you say was a calling, to fulfill a calling. You said you read Tarzan when you were a little girl, and from that book, you wanted to always go to Africa?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd saved up my pennies. It was during World War II, and all the books either came from the library, but I found this little secondhand bookshop, and I had just enough money. There was no TV back then, and no films about Tarzan, so the book was my first introduction to this glorious Lord of the Jungle. And what did he do? He married the wrong Jane. So I knew there wasn't a Tarzan, but that was when my dream began. I would go to Africa, live with wild animals, and write books about them, because no thought of being a scientist. And everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? You don't have money. True. Africa's far away, and we know it's a dangerous place. That was true back then. And you're just a girl. Girls don't do that sort of thing. But Mum said, if you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity. If you don't give up, I'm sure you'll find a way. I take that message to young people everywhere, particularly in disadvantaged communities.
And you did. You worked as a waitress and you worked as a secretary, saved up your money to go to Africa, visited a friend, and there you met the renowned anthropologist, Dr. Louis Leakey. And he was thrilled you didn't have an academic background, a traditional scientist's background, because you would approach everything with an open mind. And he encouraged you to study chimpanzees in Gombe. What did that mean to you at the time? You were in your 20s.
Yeah, well, I was obviously really, really excited and living with animals, writing books, but to be offered the chance of being the first person ever to study wild chimpanzees, our closest living relatives in the wild, it was beyond my wildest dreams. So really, really exciting.
And you were alone so much of the time. That's what struck me in watching your documentaries and reading your books. You were alone, you got malaria, you had to hike, for miles in the bush with all those creatures all around you. Never afraid. You always felt that you were meant to be there.
Yes, and I've also felt that if I didn't hurt the animals, they wouldn't hurt me. So people said, well, that was stupid. I said, well, why was it stupid? They didn't hurt me.
There were two encounters that really touched me, and it is a kind of central tenet of your advocacy. Your advocacy is not based in confrontation, it's in sharing stories and in the beings and in the personalities that you saw and shared with all of us that touched our heart. And one of the first early encounters that I saw you had with a young baby chimp that was ripped from its parents, its mother, killed by poachers, presumably, in a cage, and you locked eyes with that little creature and you went and touched its hands. It brought me to tears. Tell me how that impacted you and your desire to do the work that you did.
Well, that happened some years after I began studying the chimps, and it was in the big market in Kinshasa, in Democratic Republic of Congo. And this little chimp's mother, they shoot mothers simply to steal babies very often, to sell them in those days for medical research and circuses and pets. And this little chimp had a rope around his waist, and he was lying on his side. He was only about 1.5 on a little cage in the marketplace. Big, tall Congolese laughing around him, hot sun, and his eyes were glazed. I thought he was dying. So I went over and I knelt down and I gave the little soft sound chimpanzee greeting, like that. And to my amazement, he sat up, he looked into my eyes and reached out a little hand. And that started our whole sanctuary program, because you can't put those little guys back in the forest. They need their mother till they're at least 8 in chimp society. So it started our sanctuary program.
And that sanctuary program was the only one of its kind and made such incredible advancements, not only in saving the chimpanzees, but you went on to pass laws and regulations and educate the communities of how to care and how we're integral into the ecosystems. We all play a part. The other obvious chimpanzee that made such a difference was David Greybeard. After months and months, when you first were in Gombe looking for a wild chimpanzee, you finally spotted this leader of the male community, and he let you in. How special was that for you?
Well, it was actually, I had money for 6 months. And for 4 months, the chimpanzees would look at me and disappear. And then this one, David Greybeard, who's really handsome and had white hair on his chin. And he began to let me get a little bit closer. And then on this very special day, I saw him sitting on a termite mound, breaking off grass stems, using them to fish for termites and biting them off. And sometimes he picked a leafy twig, had to carefully remove the leaves to make a tool to fish for termites. At that time, Western science believed humans and only humans used and made tools. So this made headline news. A lot of the male scientists didn't want to believe me. Why should we believe her? She hasn't been to college. Maybe she taught the chimpanzees. I mean, that would have been really clever. But you know, then the National Geographic stepped in at that point, and then they sent a filmmaker, Hugo van Lawick, who became my husband, and his film started moving around. And, you know, finally this corroborated everything I was saying, that chimps have personalities, minds, and emotions.
That's why Dr. Leakey wanted you to be there with an open mind.
Yes, yes. But, you know, when after 2 years with the chimps, or 1.5 or something, Leakey made me go to Cambridge University to get, he said, we've got no time for an undergraduate degree. I've got you a place to do a PhD. And in ethology, I had no idea what ethology meant. No Google in those days, just studying behavior. And imagine how I felt when I got there. I was nervous. I was told I'd done everything wrong. Shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. They're your subjects. They should have numbers. And you can't talk about them having personality, mind, and emotion. Those are unique to humans. But I had this amazing teacher when I was a child who taught me that in this respect, those professors were talking rubbish. That was my dog.
But how did you confront those headwinds as, I presume, among the few women there, and here these scientists with all these lofty degrees? How did you know to stay true to your own knowing?
Well, because of Rusty. I mean, I knew that they were wrong, but I didn't confront them because I'm not that sort of person. I just quietly went on writing about the chimpanzees for my thesis, the way they are. And then Hugo's film started circulating.
And you got on the cover of National Geographic, and you became a superstar like the Jane, the Tarzan, female Tarzan. And they would start to talk about your beautiful legs and your looks. How did you confront all of that?
Well, I mean, okay, if somebody said, oh, you're only on the cover because of your legs, you'd probably be sued, right? But back then, all I wanted to do was get back to continue with the chimps. So, well, if my legs getting me the money to do it, thanks, legs.
Yeah.
and they were nice legs, right? You look on the cover of Geographic.
You actually, it's very interesting because you didn't seek fame for sure. You were passionate about the work you were doing, but you understood very early on how the fame and the storytelling could actually benefit you and getting grants and getting awareness, didn't you?
Well, it was, you know, I always say there's two Janes, and the second Jane began when the first person came up to me in an airport and said, could they get a signature? And I hated it. I put dark glasses on, let my hair down. They still seemed to recognize me because of Geographic, of course. And so it was at a certain point that I thought, well, this has happened, it must be for a reason. I must use it. So I started handing out little brochures, telling people about the Jane Goodall Institute and our youth program, Roots and Shoots. And it's helped to grow these programs around the world.
Yes, magnificently so. And as we saw with the young, beautiful girl who introduced you, you've inspired so many young people with your Roots and Shoots program in more than 60 countries, millions of young conservationists educated now and into their advocacy to protect the planet for generations to come. How important is that program? When you look at your legacy, where does that stand?
Roots and Shoots, I believe, is the greatest hope for the future, along with other similar programs. But Roots and Shoots is the only one that deals with people, animals, and the environment. It's the only one where young people choose the projects they care about, and then they discuss what they can do, roll up their sleeves, and take action. And so from the beginning with 12 high school students in Tanzania, it's now in 75 countries and growing. Yes, you're right, it was in 65, but now it's in 75 since you read that. And we have members in kindergarten and through university, and it's growing all the time. And what we're growing is compassionate, caring citizens for tomorrow. They won't all work in conservation, but they can all help the planet every single day. And, at one time, people were saying, oh, Root and Shoot is growing tomorrow's leaders. They won't all be leaders. I mean, not everybody even wants to be a leader, but we can grow, and we are growing caring, compassionate citizens in 75 countries.
You talked about Hugo van Lauwijk, your husband and father of your son, Grub. And when he came, you were not thrilled that he was invading your private space in the Gombe, and you were resistant to it. In fact, you had said early on you really had no interest in marriages and children. You wanted to live with the animals. But that marriage just seemed like such an incredible excursion and partnership for you. How did it transform with his films, your work, and your lives together? How did you manage marriage and motherhood with everything else you were doing?
Well, actually, it was quite easy because when Grub was born, by the way, the original name is Grublin.
Grublin.
Because we had a little chimp who was always covered in leaves and messy and banana and stuff. And when Grub was being weaned, which he hated, would throw his baby food all over himself. So the little chimp was called Goblin. So it was Goblin Grub and Grublin Gob. That's how he got his name. And his email address is Grublin. But anyway, until he was 6, 7, he was with me at Gombe. We homeschooled him, and every morning I went up to see the chimps. We had a feeding station back then, and every afternoon was his. And he was with me every single night until he was 3, and then I only went away for a week. When he finally went to school at 8, he went to England, but he was with my mother. It was like an extended family. And every summer, I went out to Africa, and in the autumn and spring, he came. No, I went to UK. In the summer, he came out to Africa. So we were together basically all the time.
You often have said that the chimpanzees, especially one beautiful mother named Flo and her baby Flint, that you watched from the very birth of this beautiful baby chimpanzee, and watching the mother and child bond was very impressionable to you. How did that mother-child bond and learning from Flo impact the way you mothered?
Well, there were 3 things that helped me raise my son. One was my own mother. One, I don't know if you remember the days of Dr. Spock, but he wrote all these books about child raising, and a lot of it I found really, really useful. And then from Flo, I learned I'm going to have fun with my baby, just like the mother chimps do. And You know, she used to lie on her back and dangle. She would hold little Flint's wrist with one foot and tickle him till he laughed, because chimps, that's how they laugh. And so I would hold Grub up with my feet and tickle him, and he laughed, little boy laughed. And, you know, I had fun with him. Like, she used to chase her children around a tree, because young chimps stay with mum all the time till they're about 8, and then they keep coming back for the rest of their lives.
It was such an idyllic period for you, and you get to see the full cycle of life. In human society, we tend to hide death, but it's so prevalent and in the natural world. You saw it differently and allowed us to view that cycle differently. And when Flo did die, to see the grieving of Flint, who would then later also, not much later, pass away. Talk to
Straight
me.
away, he died of grief.
Died of a broken heart.
He never left her body. It was tragic.
Talk to us about what you learned from watching that whole thing transpire, from the birth to the mothering and to the death and to that tragic ending for Flint. Because you did mention at one point that perhaps Flo could have done a better job teaching Flint to become more independent.
Well, normally the mothers do, and the kids resent it, and they whimper and scream when they're denied riding on the back or suckling, although they continue to be allowed to sleep with mum in her nest until the next baby is born. Flo weaned Flint, we now later realize, too early. And he was, instead of being about 5 or 5.5 or even 6 when he was weaned, he was only 4.5. So he threw tantrums. And when the new baby was born, he desperately continued to sleep in nest with mum and baby. And so but when the new baby died, when Flo was sick, afterwards she took him back as her baby. And so he just remained dependent. He rode her back until she literally couldn't support him anymore. She must have been about 60, which is very old for a Gombe wild chimp.
And after Flint and Flo died, the community literally fell apart and kind of devolved into warfare. And you had said from your observations that you understood where we human beings have that in our DNA to, yes, have compassion and community and reverence, but also violence. What did you most learn about us watching that society make that trajectory?
Well, you know, in the early 70s, the behavior, aggression became politicized. It's strange, isn't it, how things become politicized, like climate change today, which is tragic for all of us and for the planet. Anyway, so there was this big division. Is a baby born with a clean slate and learn aggression, or is there some kind of instinct that enables young people to become aggressive when certain situations? And from watching the chimpanzees, knowing we had a common ancestor 6 million years ago, seeing the similarities, they kiss, embrace, hold hands, pat one another, and then can show altruism and compassion, but also, as you say, violence. So that's why Leakey sent me, because he searched for remains of early humans. And from a skeleton, a skull, a fossil, you can tell a lot about, you know, the creature upright, wear on the teeth, what sort of food did they eat, but behavior doesn't fossilize. And so he reckoned if we had a common ancestor, ape-like, human-like, about 6 million years ago, then chimpanzees went on their evolutionary path. We went on ours. And he argued that if Jane sees behavior similar or the same in chimps and humans today, that probably originated in the common ancestor all those years ago. And so aggression has come with us and with them from that common ancestor.
Mm-hmm. You spent so much of that time, that revolutionary time, transforming our understanding of primates and human involvement and how we impact their worlds, their forests. But then because of Hugo, when you were still married, you started going off to join him in his work too in the Serengeti. And it widened your world and your knowledge of other animal species. How did that expand your embrace of your advocacy?
Well, actually, I got landed with chimps, but I would have studied anything. And
You
so
got landed.
at Gombe, there are chimpanzees, there's baboons, there's monkeys, there were mongooses, and all kinds of. I always wanted to help all of them. So the Serengeti just enlarged the number of animals that I could become passionate about after I met them. But I met many of them even before Gombe, because Leakey took me to one of his digs at Olduvai on the Serengeti. And one evening, the other girl and I were allowed to walk out, and all the animals were there. And one evening, there was this young male lion, fully grown, with mane on his back. He was about as far away as the wall over there, no, not much further. And he was gently waving his tail, and I think he was just curious. So Gillian wanted to hide in the undergrowth, and I said, the lion will know where we are. We won't have a clue where he is. I said, no, we must walk up from the gorge onto the plain, which we did. And Leakey said that was exactly right. And I think that evening around the campfire, he decided I was the person he'd been looking for, he said 10 years.
Wow. Yeah. What an incredible mentor he was for you.
He
right?
was.
Yeah.
But he never came to Gombe. Nobody told me what to do when I got there. Like Lillian said, I just had a pair of binoculars, pen or pencil, because it often rained, little notebook. And Lillian, no, I did not have a typewriter to start with. I couldn't afford one. It was just I wrote it all out by hand every single night.
You went on to expand the Gombe Park and the observation of wild chimpanzees and all the programs, the Jane Goodall Institute and its incredible programs, advocacy, education, the magnificent work that it does, the Chipanga Sanctuary, your 3 islands. There was one, and I say this because I think it's a tenet of your advocacy, the sharing of these stories, that we got to know some of the relationships you had with the animals. That's what's been so inspiring to so many, as opposed to just scientific research, which is also important. But the way you brought life and humanized our connection, touched our hearts. And they always say people will forget the facts, they'll never forget how you make them feel. And you made us feel compassion, and that has made such a huge difference, I think, in conservation and in your work. But there was one trip, I think it was to Chipanga, where you were releasing this old male, and you didn't know him, you said. But when he got out and looked at what was now before him, freedom, he turned to you, and he had just met you, and he gave you the longest hug. And I wanted to ask you, do you think he knew that you were responsible, even though he didn't know you? Was there some kind of knowledge that he had?
Well, I don't want to correct you, but it was a
Please do.
female.
It was a female, please.
But no, exactly what you just asked. One of his caregivers, you've muddled me. One of her caregivers actually said afterwards, "How did she know that that lady was responsible for rescuing her?" And she was, she arrived really, really sick. We had this wonderful veterinarian, Rebecca Tencio, who saved her life. And she should have hugged Rebecca, not me. But, it was this extraordinary embrace. And it was very, very moving. And it's just one of the stories of some kind of empathy that I seem to have with animals, especially dogs.
Dogs, too?
My favorite animal is a dog.
Spelled backward says it all, doesn't it?
Well, remember, it was a dog who was my teacher as a child, a very special dog. No time to talk about him now, but and I've always loved dogs, and dogs do so much for us. They are our best friend.
They are our best
Yeah.
friends. I noticed that you brought Mr. H here, and I was going to ask you about Jubilee, your first stuffed chimpanzee toy when you were a baby, but you said no, he is in a bulletproof cage or case in the
Yes.
Jane Goodall Institute?
He's with the National Geographic exhibit of Becoming Jane, which is touring America. It opened first in DC. I'm not sure where it is now, but that's where Jubilee is. This is Mr. H. And, I've already said that the Roots and Shoots program, young people are my main hope. But another reason for hope is what I call the indomitable spirit, the people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up. And Mr. H was given to me by a man called Gary Horn 34 years ago. This guy's 34 years old. And he thought he was giving me a stuffed chimpanzee for my birthday. And I reached out and took his hand and made him hold the tail. Gary, chimps don't have tails. So Gary went blind when he was 21 in the US Marines. And he decided for some odd reason to become a magician. Everybody said, but Gary, how can you be a magician if you're blind? And the children don't know he's blind. He sets out his props ahead of time. And then at the end, he'll tell them and he'll say, something may go wrong in your life. You never know. But if it does, don't give up. There's always a way forward. And he does skydiving. He taught himself to paint. And I have an amazing portrait of Mr. H, whom he's never seen, but only touched. And when I told him, this isn't a chimp, he said, never mind, take him where you go, and my spirit's with you.
Oh, beautiful. And your other little friend?
Well, I really have, when so many people still don't understand how intelligent animals are, how emotional they are. And rats don't have a very good reputation, right? But I have this rat. He represents the giant forest rat of Africa. All rats have an amazing sense of smell. And these rats, and I've watched them being trained, they can detect landmines buried under the ground after one of Africa's long civil wars. They're now being trained to climb up the crates in the ports and the airports to sniff out ivory, rhino horn, pangolin scales from this illegal animal trafficking. And one of those rats that I watched, she was just beginning her training. She was just a little wee baby. And they've called her Little Jane. And
your namesake.
So, yes. So the program is called Apopo. And Little Jane is up for adoption so that she can be cared for the rest of her life. And it's only $9 a month. Anybody can afford for 1 month to adopt Little Jane. And oh yes, so then I've got a cow because cows endure unbelievable suffering when they're being bred for giving us milk in these factory farms. Chickens too, when they're laying eggs. That's why I became vegan. And cows on their own, if they're free to do so, they have very, very strong bonds with their young. But in factory farms, the baby is born. To get the milk to flow, the baby must suckle. That makes a bond immediately. And then as soon as that bond has been formed and the milk has come down, the baby is taken away. And the calls of distress between mother and child, it's terrible. And then I also have Piglet, and Piglet represents a pig in South Africa. And you may have seen her. Her name is Pig Casso. She loves to paint. Her paintings are selling for more than $5,000. And the great thing is that as soon as she gets a paintbrush in her mouth, she's off like this, painting like this. When she actually died. And so I was there the day before I was there, she died. And so everybody was really, really upset in this little sanctuary. So I said, why don't you start an academy for animal artists? Because dogs can paint. You've seen pictures of that. I've seen a horse painting. So the first member of this academy is a sheep, and her paintings are beautiful. And then this is Houdini, and Houdini is an octopus. Some of you must have seen my octopus teacher.
Yes.
Yes. So, octopuses are so amazingly intelligent.
And you share these stories, and it shifts culture and allows us to see the animals as human beings or beings.
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 They're better than us very often.
But how do you change culture when you talk about what we do to the cows and milking and cattle, and how we see them as subspecies with no emotions that don't need to be cared for properly as part of our ecosystem? How do you change culture? You've said that we're too focused on materialism, consumerism, immediate gratification. Through your advocacy in Africa, you've changed culture. How do we change culture?
Well, we get our children into Roots and Shoots, which is all about understanding animals. And, sometimes people take animals into schools in inner city areas, and we tell stories. And social media, if you go to YouTube, there's so many amazing examples of animal intelligence, animals having fun and playing. It's getting a bit difficult because some of them now are AI, and I don't know how you sort out which is which. And my son seems to know. He says, "No, Jane, that's real." I mean, there was you can look it up. It's an amazing video, and it's also been written up in a scientific paper of a mouse resuscitating a mouse that looked dead, bringing it back to life, pounding on its chest, and even getting the tongue and pulling it out to free the airway. It's quite extraordinary. So animals are just, so once my granddaughter in Tanzania, she's teaching Tanzanian children about who animals really are. And so I'm sending her as many of these videos as I can, because that's the best way. Children say, "Oh, I never knew that. I never knew a donkey could be a friend. I never knew," they're just amazed. So it's telling stories, I think.
Telling stories, yeah, touching the heart. You happen to be in Los Angeles after the most historic and devastating wildfires have ravaged our communities, the Eaton Fire, the Palisades Fire, thousands of homes destroyed, ecosystems destroyed, biodiversity loss, displacement of so many of our wildlife. Tanzania has experienced raging wildfires of destruction. What can we learn of your conservation methods there that we can apply here and should?
Well, I'm not an expert in how we deal with wildfires. We know that the climate change is having an effect. So you get a lot of rain, which makes a lot of growth, and then you get a drought, so everything's dry, and then a fire starts, and the science says, the strange winds that blow it up, and then the embers fly in the wind and start it growing. So that's not my expertise. But, when I've met people here who've lost their homes, and I was following it very closely, and it's such a tragedy. But then, think of the people in Gaza. They lose their homes. They have no help. They're just left with literally nothing. And then all excited because there's finally a ceasefire. They go back to their homes. They're flat rubble. And then on top of that, they're bombed.
You have those stressed that we not only have to address the challenges of environmental concerns, but simultaneously the socioeconomic issues that face us too, that they're all interconnected. And you have programs at the Jane Goodall Institute that really addresses this simultaneously. You have said that, if people have enough to eat, they won't cut down the last trees, they won't poach or kill or hunt. Talk to us about the importance of that interconnected approach, simultaneous approach to address these issues.
Well, I actually often see humanity at the mouth of a very long dark tunnel. And right at the end, there's a little star. That's hope. But it's no good sitting at the mouth of the tunnel and hoping the star will come. We've got to roll up our sleeves and climb over, crawl under, work around all these obstacles: climate change, loss of species, industrial farming, use of pesticides, herbicides, artificial fertilizer, and unsustainable livelihoods. And poverty so often gets left out. But when you're really poor, they destroy the environment to survive, to make money from charcoal or timber, clear more land so they can grow more food for growing populations. In cities, buy the cheapest junk food. They can't afford anything else. And almost always that junk food is made with absolutely no regard for the environment, which is why it's cheap. And so it's when you think of it like that you begin to understand. Fortunately, every single problem that we see that we have to climb over or crawl around, there's a group of people working to try to solve it. And the one big difference between us and animals, we have this use of words. So we can tell everybody here about something they knew nothing about because we have the words to do it with. We can bring people together to have discussions. So although there are groups of people working to solve everything, they're so often working in a silo. And, a very simple example would be a group, yes, we've closed this coal mine, fantastic. All those CO2 emissions are no longer going into the environment. But if they were thinking holistically, they'd be thinking, oh, but all these people are going to lose their jobs. But there are organizations that teach people new skills when their industry closes. So if they thought holistically, approached that group of people to teach the miners before they lose their jobs, then win, 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 win. But I think we're going to need an awful lot of people to advise people on how to get new jobs after this devastation of so many people in the federal government who've lost their jobs.
Well, let me ask you with, yes. We have 65 years of history of your amazing work, the To Care program we heard about today, which is all community-based conservation efforts. But what gives you hope and keeps you motivated when you see federal jobs being slashed, you see the EPA being almost, left with very little? California is one of the most progressive states in terms of environmental regulations and reforms, being challenged right now by the new administration. Funding will be withheld unless, these regulations are dropped. What keeps you motivated and hopeful that we can really exact change?
Well, just before I answer that, we also were victims when USAID was closed because the major part of the Dakari program was funded by USAID. So it's gone like that. For the next 4 years, $5+ million gone. And it's a blow. So what does it do? It makes you, okay, I'm not going to be defeated. Makes you want to fight harder. And also, I'm a very obstinate person. And I will not be defeated by the kind of people causing these problems today. And what gives me hope? I've already said the young people, because they are changing the world. 75 countries. We've got, for example, over 1,500 groups right across mainland China. I just was there. And, we're growing in the Middle East. We're growing fast in South America. We're all over North America and Canada, Europe, moving further to the east, and of course, Africa and Asia, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, so on. So we're growing everywhere, and everywhere the young people, it's like this is the time when they need something like this. They need to get active. They need to see that they can indeed make a difference, and then know that in all these other countries are just like them, this family. We call it a family. And they find it. They go to a new country, they find a group of roots and shoots, and they've told me, it was like finding my family. even though we didn't know the same language. We had the same vision and the same goal and the same determination and the same respect, and etc., etc. So that gives me hope. The indomitable spirit, the people who tackle the impossible and won't give up, that gives me hope. This intellect, this makes us more different from other animals. Yes, they're way, way, way more intelligent than people used to think. But I mean, we've concerned. Oh, I'm not sure I like talking about space travel right now because. But anyway, it is a pretty amazing thing that we can put people on the moon, even if we. Well, never mind. But and we've designed the internet, which can do a lot of good. But people are beginning to create technologies that do allow us to live in greater harmony with the natural world, like renewable energy, for example. And we are moving in that direction now. Science in this country, but don't forget, America isn't the only country in the world, and other countries really applaud their scientists. And my guess is that many American scientists will move to other countries where they're appreciated, where they can continue with their life-saving, like destroying the NIH. Anyway, so the brain, and then the resilience of nature, that was well illustrated by Lillian. All the bare hills, the vegetation came back, and there are so many animal species on the brink of extinction which can, given a chance, come back, and it's happening.
And you actually speak a lot about nature-based solutions. What can we most learn from nature about healing our planet?
Well, somehow we have to get a different mindset and get away from what you just described as the materialistic money, money, power, money, power, money, power. And it was very interesting. There was an experiment done with, I can't remember how many migrant families, but they all came in as a couple, the ones that were chosen. And so I think there were about 6, 3 and 3. And as this couple found a niche and made a little business and then perhaps had a child and got a little house. And so there's something called a happiness index, which began in Bhutan. And so they measured the happiness index. And as they got into society and got their little house, the happiness index went up. Some of them then stopped. They were happy. They had what they wanted. They had a child or 2 and a house and a job. And the happiness index stayed the same. The other group wanted more. They wanted to do better. They wanted the children to go to university. So they worked harder. And they did better monetarily, but the happiness index went down. So somehow we have to get back to thinking, okay, I've got what I need. I don't need more than what I need.
Excess. You also stress this message, this relationship, that when we take care of nature, we're actually taking care of ourselves.
Absolutely, because, when you think of climate change and it's supposed to be called, I believe, climate resilience. That's what I'm told. Yeah. But I talk about climate change because the climate is changing. No question about it. And so what did you ask?
Important, just to see ourselves in nature, and that when we take care of our ecosystems, we're actually taking care of we humans.
Of the future. And, I had a very scary I went to a very scary meeting the other day because I've always been saying we have a window of time when, if we get together and take action, like doing the little things which may seem small, like starting programs, planting trees, clearing up litter, trying to work out ways of removing plastic from the ocean and the countryside, all these things, really good things that we're doing to make the world a better, safer place. But when I went to this, they were talking about this window of time, all these people who were really studying for years the effects of climate change and loss of biodiversity. And they divided it up into different categories, which were the tipping point. Where would the tipping point come in the heating of the globe? When would the tipping point come in ecosystem destruction? When would the tipping point come in overfishing? That sort of thing. And for some of them, it was 5 years. That shocked me. And I'm trying not to believe it. I hope that it's not true. But if it is, then what's the message? We've got to roll up our sleeves and get off our butts and work. All of us.
Is it still true that you travel 300 days a year and barely stay 3 weeks in any one location? Is that still true?
Yes, it's still unfortunately true. And when people say, Jane, why don't you slow down? You're 90, nearly 91.
2
Well,
days.
that means I'm closer to the end, whenever the end is. And there's so much left to do. I have to speed up, not slow down.
Yes,
long
you've
as I-
famously said when you've been asked, how long are you going to do this? And you've said,
I said, well, until I can't do it anymore.
Right.
And I don't know when that'll be.
what are you most proud of? And what most surprises you when you look back? I mean, it's interesting. I once asked Barbara Streisand when she saw herself at 29 at Funny Girl, and she looked at that picture, and I said, what do you think when you see her? And she goes, I was beautiful then. Why didn't I know when I was in it that I was that beautiful? I thought I was ugly. And I thought, isn't that the truth? We don't know when we're in it, the majesty of who we are. When you look back at your life, what are you most proud of? What strikes you, surprises you most?
What I'm most proud of is starting Roots and Shoots and in helping people to understand there isn't this barrier between us and the rest of the animal world. Those two things equally, I think. But what surprises me is that little girl, and growing up, and well, yes, luckily her dream came true, and she worked with animals and wanted to stay in the forest. And look what's happened. Jane Goodall Institutes in 25 countries, Roots and Shoots in 75. Gombe wouldn't be there if I hadn't been there because it was gradually being taken over by the villagers. 2 big sanctuaries which look after orphan chimpanzees. Thousands of kids inspired, as you said. And so I can only think there are 2 Janes. This one, I mean, I'm an ordinary person, right? I can make jokes. But then there's that icon out there. I have to work super hard to keep up with her.
I was speaking to Daniel of the Jane Goodall Institute, and he was saying in 2025, there are still many people that don't know the expanse of your immense work. What are the priorities today of the Jane Goodall Institute?
Priority is to make the world a better place, to try and save it, to spread Roots and Shoots, to work on, we hope that the Tokhari method will spread to other countries. It'll work anywhere. We know that now. And
are there other funding sources available now that USAID is no longer there?
Oh, we're finding them. And we'll have to probably go more to the corporate world and to philanthropists. And some things are coming in already.
And you said that you still have so much to do. What are your top 3 absolute goals in this next year, in your 91st year?
Well, spreading Roots and Shoots is one. Getting more money is another. And, well, there's 3 things. It's very hard being a major fundraiser. One is to keep JGI's programs going. Second, there's a Jane Goodall Legacy Fund because I must have an endowment, because I want this work to go on when I'm dead. And you have, it's not to fund the JGIs, but it's to fill in the kind of gap that's being caused by USAID funding drying up. And then on top of that, in Arusha in Tanzania, they're building an amazing, it's a place, it's about as big as this whole theater. And it's going to be the whole story of Jane and Roots and Shoots and Takari and amazing local artists making pictures and statues. And it's just the most amazing place. But all these things require money. My whole life has been a struggle for money.
When you had to make that decision, or the awareness that you couldn't just stay in the field with your animals, where your passion really, really was born, but you had to go out to share your iconic self with the world to raise money and raise awareness. How difficult was that for you, and do you miss it?
Well, yes, I miss it, but I couldn't do what I used to do. I couldn't run up and down the mountains anymore. But the decision, I went to this conference in 1986. I had my PhD. I could spend hours in the rainforest learning about the amazing ecosystem with every little plant and animal has a role to play, and they're all interconnected, and also developing that really strong spiritual connection with the natural world. And I planned, there was no reason for me to stop. But at that conference, which was mainly, by then there were 6 other chimp study sites, and we had a session on conservation. And it was shocking. Forests being cut down, chimp numbers dropping. We had a session on conditions in some captive situations, medical research, closest relatives in 5 foot by 5 foot cages with bars all around above and below. Used in medical research, which turns out none of it was useful. None of it was useful. And then circuses and pets. And so I left as an activist. I kind of liken it to, I call it my Damascus moment, St. Paul on the road, prosecuting the early Christians and ending up supporting them. So he doesn't know what happened. They say maybe he had an epileptic fit, which I did not, by the way. I just knew I had to try and do something. I had totally no idea what to do.
Well, as our time comes to an end here, I can't tell you what an honor it is to sit beside you and hear your story and share your story. You are emblematic of how one person can make such a difference to change the world. You're a hero, a shiro. And thank you for
But
your
remember, I have an
incredible
amazing
legacy.
team. I couldn't do it without the Jane Goodall Institute team. There's quite a lot of them here. And they're all over the world.
Congratulations to you all. Jane, why don't you give all these beautiful fans and friends a final message as we say goodbye?
Sorry?
Why don't you give everyone a final message while we say goodbye?
All right. Well, the final message to all of you, don't forget, every single day you live, you make an impact. And please choose wisely. And don't leave the world a little bit worse or even the same, but just a little bit better.
Dr. Jane Goodall, thank you.